They warned him the threat was just talk. No one would be crazy enough to hit a clubhouse full of Hell's Angels and their kids. But as the sun dropped behind the lot, the homeless boy they'd let sleep in the garage saw it first, a plain box at the front door, taped too neatly, sitting where the kids liked to race past. He'd heard about bombs like this on the streets. Engines idled. A little girl laughed behind him. And without waiting for permission, he ran straight for the box as the first wire snapped. Welcome to Echo Tales family. If you're new here, hit subscribe right now, because this story is going to touch your heart in ways you don't expect. To my faithful subscribers who've been here since the beginning, may God continue to bless you richly. Before we begin, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we come before you asking for your divine protection over everyone watching right now. Bless their families, Lord. Heal their bodies and their hearts, provide for every need, and give them a peace that goes beyond all understanding. Surround them with your favor, and let your presence be felt in their lives today. In Jesus' mighty name, Amen. Now, what you're about to see is the story of a homeless boy who ran straight into the path of a bomb to keep an entire family alive, on a day when their life was hanging in the balance, and no one else was willing to move. Eli heard the laughter before he saw the box. It floated across the Hell's Angels lot, light and sharp, cutting through the low rumble of idling engines and the metallic clink of tools from the open garage. Lily's laugh always did that, slid under noise and grit and cigarette smoke, like a bell that refused to be drowned out. Eli was halfway across the cracked concrete with a carburetor in his hands when he saw what she was running toward. A shoebox-sized package sitting right in front of the clubhouse door, wrapped too neatly in brown paper, tape pulled tight, the edges squared like it had something to prove. If you're following along and feeling the tension already, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment to tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. At first, it didn't register as anything but clutter. There was always something dumped in this lot, old parts, busted helmets, a forgotten jacket. But this box. It didn't belong. It hadn't been there when he walked past 10 minutes ago to grab tools. Now it sat perfectly centered on the doormat, dead still in the late afternoon heat, no address, no logo, no delivery driver in sight. The skin between Eli's shoulder blades prickled. He set the carburetor on a nearby workbench, fingers slipping slightly from the grease, and wiped his palms on the thighs of his jeans. Sweat darkened the fabric, more from the Arizona sun than nerves, for now. The air tasted like hot dust and faint gasoline, that strange burnt sweet smell of a place where engines never really went quiet. Behind him, someone revved a bike, the sound booming off the cinderblock walls and rolling out toward the highway. It was a comforting noise, usually. Today it just made the silence around the box feel heavier. Eli. Lily's voice cut through again, closer this time. He turned his head. She was threading her way between parked Harleys, hair in two messy braids that bounced with every step. Her small boots scuffed at the gravel, her denim jacket too big, sleeves rolled up past her wrists. She had a crumpled drawing in one hand, something with too much purple and a shaky outline of a motorcycle, and her eyes were locked on him like she expected him to drop everything just because she arrived. A few yards behind her, Razor walked out from the clubhouse, filling the doorway without trying. Cut-off denim vest over a black t-shirt, arms inked to the wrist, beard tied at the end in a short leather strip. He had that tired, watchful look he'd been carrying for weeks now, the one that said he was counting exits even when he was smiling. His gaze flicked around the lot, touching every corner, before it landed on Eli. "Yo, kid," Razor called. "You got that carb for me or you decided to marry it?" Eli almost smiled. Almost. His eyes slid back to the package. It sat there, quiet. Too quiet. He took a slow step forward, then another. The world seemed to narrow, Lily's footsteps, Razor's muttered curse at someone behind him, the distant hiss of a hose spraying dust off chrome, all of it fell back, muffled. The box pulled focus like a camera lens tightening. There was nothing written on it. No shipping label. No marker scribble. No club name, no goofy message from one of the guys. Just smooth, brown paper, folded with care and sealed with clear tape that caught the light in thin reflections. Eli's gut tightened. He'd seen something like this before. Not this exact box. Not this lot. But back when his bed was a stretch of sidewalk outside a convenience store and his blankets were whatever cardboard he could find in the dumpster, he'd spent hours pressed against the glowing windows, watching the news on the mounted TV behind the counter. One night, halfway through a stale muffin the clerk hadn't bothered to charge him for, he'd seen footage of a bombed-out biker clubhouse in Nevada. Smoke. Twisted metal. An anchor's serious voice saying, "Package," and "Doorstep," and "No return address." He'd stared at the image of a charred square of concrete where a front door used to be until his muffin turned to paste in his mouth. Now, that memory crawled up from the back of his mind and slammed into the present. "Hey," Eli called, throat suddenly dry. "Anybody order anything?" No one answered at first. The garage radio crackled under classic rock. A couple of prospects were arguing over a torque wrench, their voices rising and falling. Beth's laugh, the kind that rolled out of her chest and made everyone nearby stand a little straighter, spilled from the clubhouse kitchen window along with the smell of onions and something sizzling in a pan. Everything looked normal. Felt normal. But Eli's heart had started to pound in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. He took another step closer. Up close, he could see one corner where the tape overlapped, a small bubble of air trapped under the clear strip. Something metallic glinted in the tiny gap between paper and tape, a thin wire, not thicker than a piece of twine, disappearing back into the seam. His mouth went cold. He knew nothing about explosives. But he knew what anger looked like. He knew what it sounded like when men talked low and sharp in alleys, promising payback with words he wasn't supposed to hear. And for weeks now, Razor and the older guys had been talking like that in the clubhouse behind closed doors. Iron Cross. Out-of-town crew. Territory. They don't care if kids are around, bro, you know that. He hadn't meant to overhear. He'd just been passing with a crate of oil when the door cracked and the words spilled out. Now those words wrapped around the box like a second layer of tape. Eli. Lily again, closer. I finished your bike picture. Look. He jerked his head up. She was maybe 20 feet away, weaving between the last line of bikes and the picnic tables. The drawing flapped in her hand. Her cheeks were flushed, smiling wide, oblivious to the way his pulse had jumped. Behind her, Beth stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, eyes on Lily like she always did, like there were invisible strings tying them together. Razor's gaze slid from Eli to the box, then to Lily. For a heartbeat, everything locked. Eli saw the way Razor's shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched, the flash of understanding in his eyes. Razor opened his mouth. Eli didn't wait to hear what he was going to say. His brain threw up a collage of images in the space of a second, his stepfather's red face leaning over him, spitting. If you disappeared, no one would notice. The first night Beth shoved a plate into his empty hands and said, "Eat, kid, your skin and bones." Lily crawling into his lap with no warning, declaring, "You sit here now, this is your spot," Razor clapping a rough hand on his shoulder after Eli fixed his first flat properly, muttering, "Not bad, street rat." All the nights he'd lay awake on the cot in the back of the garage, staring at the corrugated ceiling and thinking, if anything ever comes for them, it'll go through me. His body moved before the thought finished. The world snapped into a tunnel. He dropped into a sprint, sneakers scraping dust off the concrete, breath tearing in and out of his lungs. The lot blurred at the edges, bikes, picnic tables, the faded mural on the clubhouse wall. All he saw was the box in front of him and Lily behind him and the invisible line between them he refused to let anything cross. "Lily, back," he shouted, voice cracking. "Get back." Her laughter cut off, sliced clean. He heard Beth yell her name, heard metal clatter as someone dropped a tool. Razor's voice roared something low and furious, the kind of sound that made other men step aside. Eli didn't hear the words. He only heard the blood in his ears and the crunch of his own steps. 10 feet. He could see the paper shifting slightly with the vibration of his approach, that sliver of wire catching the sun like an accusation. 8 feet. His brain supplied one calm, clear thought in the middle of the chaos: if I'm wrong, I'll look stupid. 7 feet. If I'm right. 6. He lunged. The box rushed up toward him as he dove, arms outstretched, palms slamming down on the taped paper. The cardboard flexed under his weight with a dull, heavy resistance that confirmed everything he already knew. This wasn't empty. Behind him, Lily screamed. Eli wrapped his body around the box, pulling it tight into his chest, curling his spine over it, trying to smother it under muscle and bone. The concrete scraped his knees through thin denim. Heat radiated up from the ground and off the clubhouse wall. For a split second, all he could see was the oil-stained ground inches from his face and the dust motes hanging in the air like tiny, drifting stars. Something clicked under him. A sharp, mechanical sound, too small for what it meant. Eli squeezed his eyes shut. And the world stopped. The world didn't explode the way Eli always imagined it would. There was no movie-style fireball swallowing everything in slow motion. No dramatic shudder of time. Just a brutal, bone-deep slam of force that ripped the breath out of his chest and turned sound into white noise. One instant, he was wrapped around the box, cheek pressed to hot concrete, jaw clenched so hard it hurt. The next, it felt like the ground punched him back. Pressure tore through his body, a violent shove that started in his spine and detonated outward. The cardboard under him disintegrated into splinters and shrapnel. Something sharp and molten ripped into his back, his shoulders, the backs of his arms. Heat flooded his nerves, so bright and sudden it was almost cold. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but white. Light. Noise. Pain with no edges. Then the world crashed back in all at once. The sound hit first. A roar like 100 engines all redlined at once, overlaid with the shriek of tearing metal, glass shattering, and a high, piercing whine that didn't seem to come from outside at all. It screamed inside his head, drowning everything, until it became the only constant rhythm he could feel. Eli's face slammed into concrete. His teeth clicked together hard enough to make sparks behind his eyes. The breath punched out of him in a wheeze he couldn't hear. For a few terrifying seconds, he forgot how to inhale. His lungs burned, empty but somehow still on fire, like they'd been scrubbed out with gasoline. He tried to move and discovered he didn't know where his arm ended and the rest of him began. Heat crawled down his back in jagged lines. His skin felt wet and too tight all at once. The smell hit him a split second later: burned cloth, hot metal, dust, and something darker, coppery and thick that rolled into his nose and clung there. Blood. His blood. Shapes moved in the blur beyond his eyelashes. Concrete dust hung in the air like fog, glowing orange in the late sun. Bits of paper fluttered around him, little glowing scraps of the box he'd thrown himself on. One landed in front of his nose, curling black at the edges. He tried to lift his head. Agony stabbed through the back of his neck, down his spine, like someone was pushing a hot nail between his vertebrae. His vision pulsed black at the edges, threatening to swallow everything. He let his head drop back down, cheek scraping on grit and tiny shards that dug into his skin. Somewhere beyond the screaming in his ears, another sound cut through. Lily. Beth's voice. Raw, shredded. Eli's heart lurched so hard it hurt. He forced one eye open wider. Dust burned his lashes, he blinked against it, each movement a grind of sand. The other eye refused to cooperate, swollen shut or something worse, he couldn't tell. The world tilted and rolled. Shapes resolved. The clubhouse windows were spiderwebbed with cracks. A couple of bikes had tipped over from the blast, chrome glinting at weird angles, handlebars twisted. Smoke curled from a charred circle on the concrete where the box had been. Where he still lay. Movement to his left, boots, lots of them, pounding across the lot. Black leather vests, patches, arms inked and tense. The Hell's Angels were converging on him from every direction, faces drawn tight, eyes wide. But Eli wasn't looking at them. He was searching for a small denim jacket and 2 braids. His throat scraped when he tried to speak. Nothing came out at first but a dry, broken rasp that tasted like metal. He swallowed, liquid slid down wrong, coughing sparks of pain through his ribs. Lee, Ly. It was barely a whisper. He couldn't hear it over the ringing, but he hoped someone did. Boots skidded to a stop near his head. Knees hit the ground. Eli. Eli, look at me. Razor's voice, dragged over gravel. Eli blinked up at him. Razor's outline loomed against the too bright sky, features blurred at the edges. There was blood on the older man's forearm, Eli's. Someone else's, and dust clung to his beard. His sunglasses were gone, and his eyes were naked, raw with something Eli had never seen in them before. Fear. Kid, Razor said, louder this time, like he was fighting to be heard over the shriek in Eli's head. Stay with me, you hear? Eli tried to nod. His neck answered with a lightning bolt of protest. His stomach rolled. Lily, he forced out, voice a half-broken gasp. Beth. Razor's jaw clenched. His gaze flicked to the side, following Eli's unfocused stare, then snapped back. They're good, he said. You got it all. They're fine. You hear me? You did it. Relief crashed through Eli so hard it almost drowned the pain. His body loosened, some inner fist unclenching. The lot around him fuzzed at the edges again, colors bleeding into each other. He let out a shaky breath that ended in a cough. Fire tore down his chest. Wet warmth spilled from his lips, running down his chin, tasting like a mouthful of pennies. Razor swore under his breath, soft and vicious. "Don't you check out," he growled, one big hand hovering near Eli's shoulder, not quite touching. "Beth! Get the kit. Someone call an ambulance, now. And shut that damn gate." Voices erupted around them. "I already called. Gates closing. Jesus, look at his back. Move, move, give him space." Hands slid under Eli, careful but still agony. Someone pressed something thick and folded against his back. The pressure sent a fresh wave of white heat screaming through him. He choked on it, a sound that was half whimper, half snarl. "Easy, kid." Another voice, rough but steady. "We gotta slow the bleeding." He hadn't even realized he was bleeding that much until they said it. The concrete under him felt slick now. The air around his nose smelled stronger, iron and ash. He tried to curl away from the pressure instinctively, but his body refused to answer, limbs heavy and distant. Somewhere behind Razor's shoulder, Beth appeared, Lily clutched against her chest so tight the girl's sneakers dangled. Beth's hair was half fallen from its tie, streaked with dust. There were tiny cuts on her cheek where glass had nicked skin. Lily was crying silent tears, eyes huge, face pale beneath the dirt. She held her drawing in a crumpled fist, the paper smeared with gray. "Eli," Beth whispered. He couldn't turn his head toward her, so he just shifted his eyes, willing them to stay open. The effort made the world blur again. "He can see you," Razor said, voice gentler now. "But you gotta back up, Beth. We need room when the medics get here." She didn't move at first. Her arms tightened around Lily, like if she let go, something else might blow up. Then she nodded, one sharp, broken jerk of her chin, and stepped back 2 paces, never taking her eyes off Eli. He wanted to tell her it was okay. That the pain didn't matter because Lily was still making that little hiccuping sound she made when she'd cried too hard. That the bomb had done what bombs did, but not to the people it had been meant for. The words jammed behind his ribs, trapped. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, cutting through the high-pitched ring with a different, urgent note. Eli latched onto the sound like a rope. Ambulance. Hospitals. Bright lights. Needles. Questions. He'd been around enough alleyway overdoses and convenience store robberies to know the drill from the outside. He'd watched paramedics kneel beside people on cold sidewalks, watched cops push on chests that didn't rise again, watched body bags zip. The difference was, he'd always been the ghost in those scenes. The shadow pressed up against the building, unnoticed, unseen. Now he was the one on the ground. Boots shuffled. Someone shouted directions about the gate code. Another brother cursed about Iron Cross cowards, voice cracking on the words. Phones appeared in rough hands, screens glowing as calls were made, messages sent, lines lit up. Eli drifted in and out of the noise. The edges of his vision pulsed with every heartbeat, dark closing in then retreating like a tide. Each breath felt too shallow and too deep at the same time, scraping against something raw inside. He thought of all the nights he'd lain under flickering street lamps, wondering what it would be like to die without anyone knowing his name. He knew it now. Eli. Razor had shouted it. Beth had whispered it. Lily had screamed it. It hung in the air like smoke. The sirens grew louder. Tires squealed near the gate. Metal rattled as it was shoved fully open. The wail cut out abruptly as the ambulance rolled inside. Here! Razor bellowed, arms shooting up. Paramedics spilled out in a practiced rush, dark uniforms, bright gloves, bags banging against their legs. One dropped to his knees by Eli's side, eyes already scanning. "Name?" he demanded, voice clipped. "Eli," Razor answered before he could. "He's 18. Bomb took him in the back, shrapnel everywhere. He covered it. He covered the whole damn thing." The paramedic's brows lifted a fraction, like he registered the words but didn't have time to process them. He leaned close to Eli instead. "Eli," he said, louder but steady. "Can you hear me?" Eli tried to nod again. The world swayed. "Why yeah," he managed, barely more than air. "Good. I'm going to check you over, all right? Don't try to move." Cold fingers pressed at the side of his neck, counting. A light flashed in his working eye, making spots dance. Hands probed, careful but relentless, mapping bruises and burns and bleeding. BP's dropping, someone said behind him. "We gotta move." They rolled him onto something hard and flat. The motion tore a ragged noise from his throat. The pressure on his back shifted. It felt like they'd peeled his skin off and were pressing fire directly into the exposed muscle. Straps tightened across his chest and legs. A collar wrapped around his neck, locking his head in place. The sky spun above him, a disk of white blue and glaring sun, then flipped sideways as they lifted the board. The clubhouse roof crossed his vision. The mural of a skull with angel wings loomed, its painted eyes staring down. Beyond it, the lot spread out, scattered bikes, shattered glass, men standing with fists clenched and jaws clenched harder, Beth and Lily still fixed in place like they'd grown out of the concrete. Lily tore one arm free long enough to wave her crumpled drawing at him, hand shaking. He tried to smile, but his face wouldn't obey. The ambulance swallowed him. Inside, the air was cooler, smelling of plastic, antiseptic, and adrenaline. The world shrank to the small metal box and the people moving around him in controlled chaos. One paramedic slid in beside his head, another at his legs. The doors slammed, turning the outside roar into a muffled thud. Lights flickered, then steadied. "Hang in, Eli," the paramedic at his side said, voice closer to his ear now. "We're 5 minutes out. You're not doing this alone, okay?" The word alone snagged in his chest. He wasn't. For the first time in his life, he wasn't. Through the front window of the ambulance, he caught a narrow strip of the lot as they lurched forward, and his breath hitched. Bikes. Rows of them already lining up behind the ambulance, engines snarling to life in a rolling wave. Razor at the front on his matte black Harley, face set stone, Beth and Lily visible further back by the gate, swallowed in a sea of leather and chrome. Headlights flared. The ambulance pulled onto the road. And behind them, engines thundered as the first line of Hell's Angels roared out to follow. Eli's vision dimmed at the edges again. The ringing in his ears deepened, swallowed by the rumble of what sounded like an entire storm of motorcycles building behind them. He tried to ask how many were there, how many were coming. His lips moved, but no sound came. In the cramped, bright interior, with needles sliding into his arm and a mask pressed over his mouth. The last clear thing he felt was the vibration of engines through the metal floor. And the ambulance shuddered as something slammed into its side. The impact jolted Eli harder than the explosion had. The stretcher jumped under him, straps biting into his chest and thighs, metal groaning as the ambulance lurched sideways. One of the paramedics cursed, grabbing the railing above his head as equipment swung wild on its hooks. For a second, Eli thought the bomb had gone off again. Then he felt the ambulance skid. The siren's wail stuttered as the whole vehicle fishtailed, tires screaming against asphalt. The world outside the thin walls became a smear of light and shadow, road, desert, sky, a blur of motion rolling past too fast and too close. "Hold him!" Someone shouted, voice sharp and too loud in the cramped space. Hands slammed down on Eli's shoulders, pinning him to the board as momentum tried to throw him sideways. Pain detonated through his back in a fresh wave, streaking down his legs, up into his neck. His vision flared white, then snapped back into harsh, grainy focus. Through the tiny rear window, he caught a glimpse of what had hit them. A dark truck, big and boxy, had swerved close enough to clip the side of the ambulance. Its grille filled half the frame for an instant, then vanished as the driver corrected, falling back. Headlights crowded the road behind it, dozens of them, maybe more. Some were the clean, bright beams of cars. Others were lower, twin points of white riding close to the pavement. Bikes. The Hells Angels were still there, a swarm of engines and steel eating up the lanes behind them. But the truck. It didn't belong. The ambulance jerked again as the driver fought to straighten them. The siren's pitch shifted, rising higher, more frantic, as if even the machine knew something had just changed. "Are we hit?" the paramedic by Eli's feet yelled toward the front. "Some idiot just sideswiped us," came the answer from the driver, voice crackling through the tiny opening. "He's still on our ass." The paramedic beside Eli flicked a quick glance toward the back window, jaw tightening. "Keep him stable," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We're not stopping." Eli tried to swallow, but his throat was sandpaper. The oxygen mask pressed over his nose and mouth hissed softly, fogging at the edges with each shallow breath he managed. The smell of plastic and antiseptic fought with the lingering tang of smoke and blood. His head throbbed in time with his heartbeat. Each pulse sent a hot, heavy ache radiating from the wounds in his back. Numbness tingled in his fingers, creeping up his arms like his body was slowly forgetting where he ended. The truck's headlights filled the rear window again for a heartbeat. Closer. His mind tried to make sense of it through the fog. Accident. It could be an accident. People drove like idiots all the time. He'd seen drivers cut off ambulances before, watched them roll through red lights like sirens were just background noise. But the way the truck hugged their bumper, the way it surged every time the ambulance tried to pull ahead. Accidents didn't look like that. He thought of Iron Cross. Of the whispers in the clubhouse. Of Razor's tight shoulders and the way his hand had hovered near the knife on his belt for days. He'd ruined someone's plan. He'd thrown himself on a bomb, and he'd failed to die. Maybe that mattered more than he wanted to believe. A spike of fear cut through the haze, sharp and clean. It wasn't for himself. Not entirely. If someone was willing to hit the clubhouse with a bomb, to risk children and families just to make a point, what did a crashing ambulance mean to them? The truck surged again. Metal screamed as it clipped the back corner of the ambulance. The whole box shuddered, throwing the paramedic at Eli's side against the wall. The man grunted, caught himself, and shot a look at Eli's face. "You staying with me?" he asked, voice tight but steady. Eli tried to nod. The collar around his neck made the movement tiny. His vision blurred, then sharpened around the paramedic's eyes, dark, focused, a crease of worry at the edges. "Good," the man said. "Keep doing that. You tap out on me, I'm gonna be pissed." It was a bad joke, but it landed, somehow. A thin thread pulling Eli back from the edge. The engines outside grew louder. Not just the low, steady hum of the ambulance and the grinding whine of its stressed axles, but the layered growl of motorcycles. Through the window, in brief flashes between the truck's looming shape, he could see them. Bikes flanking the road. Some behind, some starting to move up along the sides. Leather vests, helmets, shoulders hunched forward in rider stances. Headlights bobbed with each rise and fall of the road. The Hells Angels weren't just following anymore. They were closing in. One bike slid up on the truck's left, its rider leaning forward, hand lifted as if to signal. Another came up on the right, closer to the ambulance, engine snarling. Eli couldn't hear their voices through the walls, but he could imagine the curses, the shouted orders, the raw fury that had filled Razor's face when he'd seen the shattered brown paper and Eli's broken body. He shouldn't have been here. He should have been back on his cot, swapping out air filters, learning the difference between sounds in an engine. Not strapped to a board while strangers in uniform tried to keep him breathing. But he was here. And so were they. The truck swerved suddenly, clipping the bike on its left. The rider jerked, tires squealing. For a terrifying second, the motorcycle fishtailed, almost going under the truck's wheels. Eli's stomach dropped. The bike caught traction again at the last second, swinging wide. The rider's arm shot out, gesture sharp and furious. The truck's brake lights flared bright red. The ambulance driver swore. Tires screeched. The world lurched forward as momentum shoved Eli against his straps, his wounds screaming in protest. Equipment banged against metal. A bag swung into the paramedic's shoulder. "Are they insane?" the driver shouted. "We're carrying a critical." The truck didn't care. It fell back for a heartbeat, then surged forward again, bumping the ambulance's rear. Each impact echoed through the frame, a dull, sickening thud that vibrated in Eli's bones. He thought of Beth's face, all the color gone, arms locked around Lily like she'd become the only thing keeping the girl on Earth. He thought of Razor's hand hovering inches from his shoulder, the way his voice had cracked, just once, when he'd said, "You did it. They're fine, If this truck flipped them, none of that would matter." The paramedic beside him glanced toward the window one more time, then down at Eli. "You're going to feel lightheaded," he warned, adjusting a line. "We're giving you something for the pain, but you gotta keep fighting it, okay? I need you awake until we hit those doors." Eli's eyelids weighed a ton. Every blink lasted longer than the last. The temptation to let go, to sink into the dark where nothing burned or throbbed or screamed, tugged at him like gravity. But the engines, the endless, rolling rumble of them through the floor, kept pulling him back. It sounded like a promise. Two more bikes shot up on the truck's right side, so close their handlebars almost brushed its paneling. One rider reached out with a boot, kicking at the metal, trying to force distance. Another gestured toward the shoulder, a clear command. The truck swerved again, clipping the white line, then jerking back. For a second, it hovered between choices. Eli tried to focus. His vision doubled, then tripled. Light smeared, stretching out into long, bright lines. The siren's wail stabbed through his skull, fighting the relentless ring left over from the blast. The truck's brake lights flared one more time. Then it jerked sharply toward the ambulance. Metal shrieked. The side of the ambulance buckled inward with a thunderous crack. One wall crumpled just enough that a cabinet popped open, spilling gauze and instruments in a stuttering rain. The stretcher slid a few inches, straps tightening, biting hard into Eli's ribs. He couldn't hold back the scream this time. It ripped out of him, raw and animal. The paramedic threw his weight against the board to keep it steady, teeth bared with effort. Outside, the engines roared louder. It wasn't just noise now. It was a wall of sound. Bikes surged up around the truck, 3 on each side, one dropping back, another darting forward. From his limited angle, Eli saw flashes, knuckles whitened on handlebars, eyes narrowed behind goggles, patches fluttering at shoulders. Razor's bike appeared on the far side, close to the driver's window. Even through the glass, the distance, the blur of speed, Eli recognized the line of his shoulders, the set of his jaw. Razor leaned in. His mouth moved, shouting something Eli couldn't hear. The truck jerked again, rocking the ambulance. One of the bikes cut in front of the truck's bumper for half a second, forcing it to tap the brakes. Another rode so close to its rear quarter panel that the slightest move would cause contact. They weren't just escorting anymore. They were boxing it in. The ambulance driver took the opening, engine howling as he punched the gas. The vehicle surged forward, the siren's wail climbing higher as they shot ahead a few precious car lengths. Almost there, he yelled. "I see the exit. Hospital." The word floated through Eli's mind like a lifeline. Doors. Lights. People who could dig the fire out of his back, stitch him up, keep his lungs from filling with whatever wanted to drown him. His body felt distant, like he was already halfway out of it. The paramedic's hand landed on his shoulder, firm and grounding. "Stay with me, Eli. Don't quit now." He tried to answer. The mask muffled his voice. Maybe nothing came out at all. But he fixed his gaze on the light streaking past the sliver of side window, counting each one like a marker between him and something that wasn't this. Behind them, the roaring wall of engines moved as one. The truck made one last desperate move. It cut hard toward the median, trying to shoot around the bikes on its right. Tires squealed. Gravel sprayed. For a terrifying second, it rode the line, half on asphalt, half on the sloped shoulder. One bike was there first. It slid up, impossibly close, handlebar brushing the truck's panel, rider's boot planted like a brace. The rider's arm shot out, slamming a fist into the side mirror, snapping it back. The truck jolted, overcorrected. And slammed back into its lane too fast. Its rear tires clipped the curb. Momentum did the rest. Through the back window, Eli saw it start to roll. The truck tipped onto 2 wheels, hung there for a split second like time had paused, then tumbled sideways, metal twisting, glass erupting into 1,000 glittering shards. It rolled once, twice, sending dirt and parts flying, before slamming to a crushed stop in a plume of dust. Bikes scattered, swerving around the wreck, some sliding sideways, boots scraping sparks from the asphalt. One motorcycle went down, rider tumbling, rolling, then scrambling to their feet, limping but upright. The ambulance shuddered, but didn't slow. The siren screamed. The engines behind them howled back. The hospital exit loomed ahead, a green sign, then a sweeping ramp curving away from the highway. The ambulance swung into it, leaning hard. The paramedic braced himself again, one hand on the railing, the other still on Eli. The world outside shifted from endless road and desert to concrete walls, then to the flat, looming shape of a hospital building growing larger in the windshield. Eli's vision tunneled. The ring in his ears faded, replaced by a dull, distant thud that might have been his heartbeat. He thought of Lily's drawing, crumpled in her fist. Of Beth's eyes, wet and fierce. Of Razor's voice over him, saying, "Asterisk, you did it. You got it all, asterisk." Something inside him relaxed around those words. The ambulance blew past the emergency entrance sign, swung toward the bay doors. Red lights washed over the interior as they slid to a stop so hard his body tried to keep going. The brakes screamed. The siren cut off. For a moment, there was an impossible silence. Then everything moved at once. The rear doors flew open. Bright white light flooded in, burning his open eye. Shapes leaned over him, more uniforms, more hands, more voices snapping orders. On 3. They grabbed the stretcher. The world tipped backward as they yanked him out of the ambulance and into the open air. The sky above the bay was a deepening blue, bruised with the first hints of dusk. For a second, he saw over the shoulders of the people carrying him to the hospital parking lot. Engines filled it like a living sea. Rows upon rows of motorcycles gleamed under the setting sun, chrome catching the light in blinding flashes. They were lined up in perfect rows, hundreds of them, stretching all the way to the far fence. Riders stood beside them or sat on their seats, helmets off, faces turned toward the ambulance bay. Angels. Nomads. Patches from cities he'd never heard of. Different crews, different colors, all clustered together in one impossible, humming mass. They were all looking at him. The sight punched through the fog like a fist. For 18 years, nobody had noticed if he came or went. Now 700 bikers had shown up to see if he lived. Tears he hadn't realized he still had burned at the corners of his good eye. The air felt colder against his skin out here, but the weight of their stares was warm, almost hot. The stretcher rolled forward. Automatic doors parted. Fluorescent lights replaced the sky. The last thing Eli saw before the doors slid shut was Razor stepping out from the front line of bikes, eyes locked on him, lips moving around words Eli couldn't hear. Then the doors cut that world off like a blade. The stretcher jolted as they swung into a side hall, voices barking room numbers and codes. A nurse leaned over him with a mask and a syringe. The paramedic squeezed his shoulder one last time, then peeled away. "All right, Eli," someone said. "Count backwards from 10 for me." He didn't make it to 8. The anesthetic hit like a wave, cold and heavy in his veins. The ceiling blurred into streaks of white. The pain in his back dulled, then numbed, then vanished altogether. Darkness rose up, soft and deep. He let it take him. Somewhere, far away, he thought he heard the muffled rumble of engines echoing through concrete, refusing to leave. And as the black closed over his head, a single thought cut through, clear and impossible. If they were all out there for him, then whatever came next would not be simple. Or safe. Eli's first thought was that the darkness felt soft. Not like the cold, hard kind he'd known under bridges and in bus stations, where sleep meant one eye open and one hand on the only thing he owned. This was heavy and warm, like sinking under thick blankets in a room where nobody was yelling, where nothing smelled like beer or stale cigarettes. For a while, he floated there, with no body, no pain, just the echo of engines somewhere far away, rolling like distant thunder. Stories like this are just the beginning. If you felt it with every twist, commit by subscribing so you won't miss what's next. Voices started to bleed into the dark. Muffled at first, like sound underwater. 3 days. Kept asking about the girl. Miracle he's alive. The softness thinned. Something tugged him upward, toward light. Eli surfaced into brightness all at once. Harsh white ceiling. The steady beep 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 of a monitor. A plastic taste in his mouth and a weight in his arm. For a second, he panicked. Body trying to jerk, lungs trying to drag in air too fast. Pain hit a moment later. Not the blazing, all-consuming fire from the bomb, but a deep, heavy ache that wrapped around his back and ribs, shot down his arms, and settled into a kind of throbbing. His muscles protested even the thought of moving. Easy, kid. Easy. The voice was rough and low, familiar enough to cut through everything. Eli blinked, forcing his good eye to focus. The room swam, then steadied. Razor sat in a padded chair beside the bed. He looked wrong. Not because of the worn black vest or the tattoos or the braids in his beard, those were exactly where they were supposed to be. It was everything else. The lines around his eyes were deeper. Dark smudges bruised the skin under them. His hair was shoved back like he'd run his hands through it 1,000 times and forgotten to stop. There was a faded smear of something dark on his collar, as if he'd wiped at his face and missed a spot. He was slouched forward, elbows on his knees, fingers laced together so tight his knuckles had gone pale. When he saw Eli looking back, his whole face crumpled for a second, like someone had let go of an invisible thread holding him together. "Thank God," Razor breathed. The words were rough, scraped raw. Eli wanted to answer, but something thick and plastic sat at the back of his throat. He gagged, trying to reach for it, and only then realized he couldn't lift his hand. Tubes snaked from the crook of his elbow. A line ran into the back of his hand. Tape strapped wires to his chest. Razor half rose, hitting a button near the bed with more force than necessary. "Hey," he barked toward the open door. "He's awake." The minutes that followed blurred again. A nurse appeared, then a doctor. The plastic tube slid from his throat in one awful, burning pull that left him coughing until his lungs felt shredded. Lights flashed in his eyes. Fingers pressed at his limbs, his spine, the bandages that wrapped his chest and shoulders. He caught fragments. Shrapnel removed. 43 pieces. No spinal damage. Lucky. Every time Eli tried to speak, the doctor told him to save his voice. When the room finally emptied, leaving only the soft beep of the monitors and the hum of air through a vent, he turned his head a fraction toward Razor. "Lily?" The word scraped out like broken glass. Razor's eyes shone. "Safe," he said, voice thick. "Beth too." Not a scratch on either of them. You took, he swallowed hard, jaw flexing. You took it all, kid. The tension that had been coiled in Eli's chest since the second he'd seen that box finally loosened. He let out a shuddering breath. Wetness stung his eye before he realized he was crying. He wasn't sure if he was crying because he hurt, or because he didn't, not in the way that mattered most. He'd never mattered this much before. Not in any equation. Razor scrubbed a hand over his face, palm rasping against his beard. Bomb squad came through, he said. Said whoever built that thing knew exactly where to put it. Front door, sweet spot. If you hadn't, he trailed off, looking at the wall for a long moment, breathing slow, like he was trying to find words that didn't exist. They said the blast radius would have taken out half the front of the clubhouse. Kitchen. Picnic tables. Kids' corner. His eyes cut back to Eli. You get what I'm saying. Eli pictured it without meaning to. Lily's swing. Beth's grill. The long wooden tables where plates piled high with food always appeared like magic. The little corner full of toys someone had dragged out one day and never put away. Gone. His stomach flipped. He swallowed, throat still raw. I'm glad I was there. Razor huffed out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. Glad I let you sweep the damn floor, you mean, he muttered. Silence stretched between them for a beat, not heavy, just full. The door eased open a crack. Beth's face appeared in the gap first, eyes wide, cautious, as if she were afraid of what she'd see. When she registered Eli awake, she pushed the door fully, stepping in with one hand wrapped around a much smaller one. Lily. She was in a fresh t-shirt with a cartoon cat on it and leggings dotted with stars. A band-aid sat on her cheek where a tiny cut must have been, but otherwise she looked untouched. No cast, no brace, just a small smudge of crayon on one knuckle. Her eyes went huge. Eli. He barely had time to brace before she tried to launch herself forward. Beth's arm shot out, catching her before she could hit the bed. Careful, baby, Beth murmured. He's still hurting. Lily wriggled, but obeyed, settling for leaning as close as Beth would allow. Her free hand unfolded a piece of paper she'd been crushing in her fist. It crackled as she smoothed it against the edge of the mattress. I made you this, she said, like that explained everything. Eli blinked down at it. The drawing was done in crayons, thick, determined lines. A stick figure boy with messy hair stood in the middle, arms out. Behind him, someone had drawn a big, boxy shape with lines coming off it like little explosions. Around him, there were bikes, wobbly circles with sticks that were obviously wheels and handlebars. Above the boy, in big, careful letters, she'd written, "My hero." The word blurred as his vision swam again. He'd never been anyone's anything. Now he was a hero in crayon. Beth let her hand rest on the rail of the bed, close to Eli's arm but not touching. You gave me my world back, she said softly. I don't have words big enough to thank you for that, so. I'm probably just gonna annoy you with food and fussing for the rest of your life instead. He tried to laugh. It came out as a wet, choked sound that hurt more than it should have. Beth's eyes filled anyway. Lily's small fingers curled around his, careful of the tape and the 4-line. You scared me, she said, lower now. But Razor said you did the bravest thing he's ever seen in real life. So I'm not mad. There was something almost absurd about that, and it hit him in a strange, sweet way. As if her being mad would have been worse than any bomb. The hours that followed bled into each other. Doctors checked charts. Nurses adjusted machines. Beth and Lily came and went, always leaving something behind, flowers in a plastic cup, a little stuffed dog, another drawing. Razor remained rooted in his chair more than he moved, stepping out only when someone forced him to eat or wash his face. But it was the waves of strangers that cracked Eli's sense of what was real. They came in twos and threes, knocking softly and hesitating in the doorway like they weren't sure they belonged in a hospital. Big men with sun-baked faces and leather vests from places Eli had only ever seen on license plates: Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado. Some had the same patch as Razor. Others wore different colors, different names stitched over their hearts. They all looked at him the same way. Like he was something they didn't quite know how to hold. Some shook his hand gently, careful of the bandages. Some told him short, rough stories, about brothers they'd lost, clubhouses they'd defended, blood they'd seen spilled for less than what he'd done. A few didn't say much at all, just nodded once, eyes bright, as if that alone cost more than they were used to giving. Every time the door closed behind another set of boots, Eli stared at the ceiling for a long moment, trying to process the idea that men from miles away had ridden here for him. 3 days ago, he'd been a ghost sweeping floors. Now bikers he'd never met were calling him brother like it was a fact. On the 4th day, Razor walked in carrying something draped over his arm. The usual noise in the room, machines, hallway footsteps, Lily humming under her breath as she colored in the corner, seemed to fade around the edges. Razor didn't sit right away. He stood at the side of the bed, looking down at Eli with a face that was too serious to read. Then he took a deep breath, like he was gearing up to kick down a door. "You came to us a kid with nothing," he said quietly. "No home. No people. No place where your name meant anything." Eli stared at him, suddenly afraid in a way the bomb hadn't made him. "But you worked," Razor went on. "You shut your mouth when you needed to, you listened, you learned. You treated every bike in that shop like it mattered. You treated my kid like she was made of gold." His voice wobbled on that last word. He cleared his throat. "And then you saw danger coming for her, and you ran into it." He unfolded the thing on his arm. Black leather, worn and soft at the edges, caught the light. A familiar patch blazed across the back, skull, wings, letters that had always seemed too big, too loud. On the front, over the left chest, above where a heart would be, white stitching picked out a name in careful letters. Eli. It didn't feel real. Razor laid the vest carefully over the blank space at the foot of the bed, smoothing it out with his palm like it was something fragile. "You're not some stray we took pity on," he said. "You bled for us. You put your body between a bomb and my family. That makes you one of us in a way 100 years of prospecting couldn't." His gaze locked with Eli's. "If you want it, this is yours." Time stretched out. Eli looked at the vest. At his name. At the patch he'd spent months staring at from the outside, never imagining it would be more than a symbol of a life that wasn't his. He thought of his stepfather, beer can in hand, voice a low, constant poison, asterisk if you disappeared, nobody would notice. Asterisk he thought of cold nights and colder mornings, of cops nudging him awake with the heel of a boot, of being wallpaper in other people's lives. Then he thought of 700 bikes lining a hospital lot. Of Lily's drawings. Of Beth's hand steady on the bed rail. Of Razor's voice breaking when he'd thought Eli might not wake up. His good hand trembled as he reached down, fingers brushing the leather. It was heavier than it looked. It felt like the weight of something final. "Are you sure?" he whispered. Razor let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't come out so rough. "This isn't charity, kid," he said. "We don't hand those out 'cause we feel bad. You earned it. In the hardest way there is." He leaned in, big hands settling gently on Eli's shoulder, careful of the injuries. "You belong," Razor said. "No hesitation. No doubt. Whether you put that on or not, you're ours. But if you do, then the rest of the world sees it too." Eli swallowed hard. All his life, belonging had been a door that slammed in his face. Now it was lying at the foot of his bed, stitched in white. He nodded, once. Razor's eyes softened. "All right then." With Beth's help and a nurse's careful hands, they eased Eli upright, pillows stacked behind him. Every inch felt like a mile, his muscles protesting, stitches pulling. Sweat broke out along his hairline. But when Razor lifted the vest, sliding it gently around his shoulders, the pain faded into something else. The leather settled against his hospital gown with a whisper. It smelled like the garage. Like dust and oil and long rides under open sky. Lily gasped, hands flying to her mouth. "You look so cool," she announced, solemn and awed. Beth's laugh came out on a choked breath. There were tears on her cheeks again, but her smile was steady. Razor stepped back, eyes shining as he took in the sight. "Eli," he said, almost formal. "Welcome to the family." The room felt too small to hold what those words did to him. For a long moment, Eli couldn't speak. His throat closed around the ache there. He let his hand rest over the stitched name on his chest, feeling the faint, steady thump beneath. He had almost given that heartbeat up. Now it echoed under a symbol that said he wasn't alone. "Thank you," he managed at last, voice rough but steady. "For everything. For this." Razor shook his head. "You gave us everything first," he said quietly. "We're just catching up." Outside the window, the last of the sunlight dipped below the horizon. Parking lot lights clicked on in a ripple, washing the rows of motorcycles in pale gold. Engines turned over, one by one. The sound rolled up through the walls and into the room, a low, steady roar, deep enough to feel in his bones. He'd heard that sound from sidewalks and alleyways, always as something distant, untouchable, meant for other lives in other worlds. Now it vibrated in his chest under a vest that carried his name. Eli closed his eye, letting the rumble settle into him. He'd gone from invisible to irreplaceable in the span of a single, reckless leap. He knew the danger wasn't over. Whoever laid that bomb wasn't done. 700 bikes didn't gather without the world noticing. Attention, he'd learned on the streets, could be a weapon all its own. But for the first time, he wasn't facing any of that as a kid alone on concrete. He was facing it as a brother. As the engines outside swelled into a unified thunder that rattled the glass, Eli tightened his fingers over the patch on his chest. And thought, with a mixture of fear and fierce pride, that whatever came next in this war between clubs would have to deal with him too.